Hi, I'm Pete, and welcome to Just a Few Acres Farm. To start this video, I have a little story to tell. Picture yourself on a nice June day, bright sun, birds, no clouds in the sky, a man on his tractor, a Farmall MD, tedding hay, putting along at about half throttle for about 3 hours. It was wonderful. I finished tedding hay. I came up the laneway, throttled the tractor up because I'd been running it at about half throttle to slow the hay tedder down all that time I was tedding. And there's a skip in the tractor. This Farmall MD. I think I've been here before. There was no banging, just a skip, so I thought, well, maybe it's just a stuck valve. This is what I found. See that? It's broken. You can't see this one very well, but it's broken too. It just happens to be compressed. And this here, the valve stem, where the valve spring used to be, that's what I found. This happened once before, a couple of years ago. This engine's probably got 100 hours on it, maybe 150. The last time, the valve dropped into the cylinder and bent. This time, it didn't. My best guess as to why the first one dropped into the cylinder bent and the second one didn't is because in between then, I brought the head down to Dave Richards' machine shop and he put new valve guides in. The first machine shop that did the work on this engine didn't replace the valve guides, and when I took it apart after it dropped a valve, I found that the guides were really loose. So the valve could wobble just a little bit and bind in the guide, and that's why that first valve dropped and bent. This valve didn't. It was held in because it had a good fit in the guide. Push rods. Now you can see the broken springs better. There's one. There's one. There's the one that busted and fell apart. And I found all the pieces from the busted one except for one of the keepers. So I'm going to have to go hunting for that because it's not immediately visible. The other one was laying on the top of the block. And what we have is where each push rod goes down, there's a hole that's much larger than the push rod. It goes down to meet the lifter down there in the bottom, and this is a big open space underneath here, like a long slot, and I suspect it probably fell down into there someplace. Not the first time anything's fallen down there. When I was rebuilding the engine, I had that problem a few times. In case you're wondering, it looks like this. It's just a little half collar, and it fits in because it's tapered and locks into this spring cap here. Like that. I'm missing the other one. I guess I'm going to have to leave that for now and hope it turns up. This is how you remove the valve spring from the valve. It works better when the spring's not broken. Problem with magnets is they're magnetic. Yep. That's what I think. Well, come off there. There we go. Keeper. They're called keepers because you need to keep track of them, or they're going to bounce around in your engine. This one only broke into 2 pieces. And this is the valve spring cap, which needs to come off. Like so. This one's fine to reuse. And of course that valve fell in while I was messing around, but we can turn the engine and bring it back up. Here's what I'm replacing with. It's an old stock spring. It's not a new old stock spring, it's an old stock spring. Compare it to the broken spring that I took out, and you can see that the spring coil spacing varies, whereas this one, it does not. The top is also different. I put the cap on the replacement, extend the valve spring compressor, get it oriented the right way. There we go. And tighten it up, which compresses the spring. Still looking for that keeper that I lost. You can slide this down over. I've got the piston on this valve at the top of the stroke so that the valve is held up. And then try my best not to be fumble-fingered Fred to slide the keepers in. There's one. There's 2. Now all I have to do is carefully release the valve spring compressor. And give her a tap or 2 to make sure that the keepers are seated in well. Since I've got number 1 piston at the top of its stroke, we'll go ahead and do the exhaust valve for that cylinder as well, because it'll hold the valve up. And yes, I am replacing them all. Old spring. Older spring. It is. It's older. In case you weren't around a couple years ago when I last worked on this tractor, I'll give you the story. About 3 years ago, I restored this tractor top to bottom, went through everything as I do from time to time on old tractors. And parts are a bear to find for this tractor because they didn't make very many of them. I think they made 17,000 MDs, something like that. And there is really very little aftermarket demand. And this was during COVID when I was doing it, which made things even worse. So I looked around, and Bates Corp in Indiana had the parts that I needed for it. So I bought all the engine parts from them, including new valve springs. Put it all back together, ran great, ran it for probably 50 hours, and it broke a valve spring. I can't remember which one. I made a video of its repair. But it broke, and Bates was good enough to provide me with a new valve spring free of charge, and I think it'd been a push rod too, and damaged cap, and I had a blown head gasket, which was another story, but I replaced that too. Ran great again, ran it for 2 years, and now this has happened. Now, back when that original valve spring broke, I faced a choice of whether to just replace that valve spring or replace them all, with the thinking being that maybe I had a bad batch of valve springs. Maybe there was something wrong in the manufacturing process and the tempering of the springs that made them brittle. But the problem is, there's probably only one supplier for these springs. It's not like a Chevy 350 engine where there's all kinds of aftermarket available. These springs are probably made in small batches, and whoever has them, you know, draws from that same batch. So the thinking was, hopefully, fingers crossed, I had a fluke, just a bad spring out of a batch and not a bad batch, because if I'd replaced all 8 from the same batch, I would have had the same problem anyway. Well, that gamble didn't pay off. And so what I asked Bates for this time was a full set of new old stock springs, which would be springs that were made by International Harvester back in the day when lots of these tractors were still running, or comparatively lots, even though they didn't make that many. They didn't have any. They found 2 actually, and I wanted 8. So the next best thing in my mind is to use used valve springs. These are what I think are good used valve springs out of an MD, because they're particular to an MD, not an M, not a gasoline M. And Bates sent me a dozen of them. I only need 8. They said, here, you can take all these and pick what you think are the best ones and put them in. And Bates again provided them at no charge, as well as I had a bent push rod here and a damaged valve spring cap, and they've taken care of me. I hope it works this time. I think it will. Here's the second broken spring. Oh, look at that. Oh my God. There's my missing keeper. I guess I got the spring a little giddly wonkers on the compressor. Oh well. I got all the springs in, no problems. And while we're in here, I want to show you something. This engine has 3 valves per cylinder, and this cap covers the 3rd valve. That's the cylinder right there, intake exhaust, and this is the compression release. And what happens is when you're running on gasoline, there's a cam on the rocker arm assembly that pushes down on this cap, and pushing down opens up the valve down there, and it exposes an extra combustion chamber, and the spark plug, which is down in there, is in that chamber. And that, so when it's running on gas, that's open, the spark is igniting gasoline, and then when you close it, compression increases because there's less volume, and it can run on diesel. The other thing you may have noticed is I got 2 different batches of springs in here. Some of them go down to the right, and some of them go up to the right, mirror image coil. And it's not that some are installed upside down. See, here's one of the springs I took out. See which way it's rising? It's rising to your right. If I flip it over, it's still rising to the right. These were just coiled from two different batches of springs, coiled the opposite way. It's the same part number for intake and exhaust springs, so it really doesn't matter. They'll be fine the way they are. The shaft underneath the rocker arm assembly and these cams are what push on those third valves. Quite complicated. You gotta stay in there. What did I forget? You know what I forgot. Push rods, of course. Wouldn't work very well without them. Now this can go on. Oh, get down there. There's a little ball under here that I have to line up to push on the compression release. And it's kind of a pain. It's this little guy right here. It's a rod with two balls on it. One ball's got to go in the cup on the cam, and the other one's got to go in a receiver down below. It's a pain. Well, get in there. Just cooperate with me. Now we need to adjust the valve lash, and I got to bring it up to top dead center number 1 piston compression stroke. The exhaust valve's opening now. Exhaust valve closing. Intake valve opening. Intake valve closing. Now it should be coming up on compression. That one's real tight. Next we have to look at the pointer right there on the crank pulley and look for it to reach DC, dead center. There we go. Top dead center compression, we should have 1 to adjust, and that one definitely needs adjustment. 2, little lash. 3, and 5. So we can adjust half the valves at this position. Well, we know this first one needs some adjustment. It's too tight. We have to adjust the lash to 17 thousandths. And I find that's easiest if you put a wrench on the nut, turn the screw until you get to where you want to be, which I would say is right there, and then tighten her back down. Numero dos. Tighten it up just a touch. Good, and continue on. So half the valves are done. I have to rotate the motor over 360 degrees. And then I can adjust the rest of the valves. 4, 6, 7, 8. And some of them are really out of whack. All the valves are adjusted. Let's turn it over to make sure everything works. Switch it to gas so it turns over easier. Looks good. This is the line to the oil pressure gauge. This is the intake manifold. I covered it up for safekeeping. This intake snakes around to the other side. How does it go in here? I've forgotten. It goes this way, I think. Will she run, and how will she run? That is the question. Here, coming off the intake line, is a little air cleaner that leads to a kind of a vent line or air intake line down to the injection pump. It's the moment of truth. I'll give her a try. Turn on the gas. Spider webs. Sounds pretty good to me. Hillary and Gray came out to celebrate with me. Tell them what you told me, Hillary.
She's purring like a kitten. That's great.
I think we should go for a joyride. Fourth gear. Yep, the wheel spins still. Yep. Oh, I'm happy this is fixed again. I guess this is another chapter in the MD saga. Every time I think I have it running the way that it should, it challenges me with something else. That's okay. This tractor is so complicated compared to a regular M. And whenever I post a video about it, there's always tons of questions like, can you run it on gas all the time? The short answer to that is no. How does it, is it a pony motor? Is it like an old H that, you know, you switch to distillate or kerosene when it gets hot? No, it's not anything like that. It's actually a diesel engine on this side and a gasoline engine on the other side, if you look at it. And if you're interested in more, I have a whole video just about this line of tractors, the gas start diesels that International Harvester made. I'll put a link to it in the end screen. I hope you enjoyed this video. It's another job I can cross off the list. It's kind of been weighing on me for a couple of months now. I'll see you next time. Running on gasoline to shut down. I run the carb dry. Switch it back to diesel so that the compression valves are in their seats and don't warp on their stems. And switch off the ignition.